from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the North Idaho College Public Forum. Today's program is going to deal with consumer issues and consumer rights, and we're very fortunate to be able to have a real specialist, an expert with us to discuss this important topic. Many of you are very aware of the fact of what we call rip-offs that take place all over the country, and in each state there is an attempt to address this question. In the case of Idaho, the major source for receiving those complaints is the Idaho Attorney General's office within the Consumer Division. Our guest is representing that division today, and we welcome to the program Chris Bivens, who is described in her title as a consumer specialist. She has been with the State Attorney General's office for the past 10 years, and since July the 1st, 1987, has been within the Consumer Division. She's in charge of supervising the front office and receiving the complaints. She is also in charge of consumer education programs and consumer product safety issues. And it is our purpose today to assist you in looking out for these problems and what you could do about it. And for you who don't live in Idaho, we will discuss some ways that you could get in touch with people in your state or province in Canada. It's my pleasure to welcome you, Chris Bivens.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And as always, it's a pleasure to have our regular panelist today, Steve Schenck, who's the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And I shall ask Steve to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Chris, if we could, I wonder if you'd begin by telling us a little bit more about the kinds of issues your office deals with and the kinds of services you provide.
Okay. The Idaho Consumer Protection Act deals with unfair or deceptive business acts or practices. We handle consumer complaints that relate to unfair or deceptive business acts or practices, telemarketing complaints, mail order complaints, people not receiving their product or not getting what they thought they were going to receive, automobile issues, whether it be auto repairs or auto purchases, these types of things. Sometimes businesses are also affected by specific scams, trying to get businesses to advertise in magazines that overinflate their rate of distribution. These are the types of things that we deal with in the Consumer Protection Unit.
It sounds like there's sort of a continuum of issues there, all the way from someone who's unhappy with a service they in fact received to someone who was promised something that they never got. Where do you cross the line between unfair or maybe shoddy, I don't know if that's the right term, and out-and-out fraud?
Well, the Idaho Consumer Protection Act says that it had the ability or did deceive the consumer into believing that they were going to get something that they didn't receive, a product or service that they thought that they were going to receive.
And do you, on the one end of the continuum, the less serious end that I described, I'm unhappy with a product or a service that I received, would you help me with that? If I came to you and said, gosh, I've gone back to so-and-so several times and gotten no satisfaction, or is that really between me and the merchant?
Actually, we do help consumers in that situation. We ask that consumers contact our office. They file written consumer complaints, and sometimes it just helps having a third party go in and try to mediate the complaint. We write to the business and ask the business to respond in writing, because we understand there's always two sides to every story. But we do encourage consumers to, number one, contact the business and allow them the opportunity to resolve the complaint first, because oftentimes we get complaints and the consumer hasn't contacted the business first, and so it's kind of a shock for the business to get a complaint from the Attorney General's office, and of course that upsets them, because they say if we had known there was a problem, we would have worked with the consumer to resolve the issue.
I'm glad you raised that point. As a longtime Chamber of Commerce member, we're probably going to focus in this program primarily on businesses who don't do what they claim that they will do. But what's your experience? Isn't it true that in Idaho and in most places the vast majority of merchants are honest and trying to do a good job for their customers?
Yes, and a lot of times it may just be some unfortunate circumstances that there was a problem, and most generally businesses are willing to respond to our office, and they respond in a very cooperative manner. It's that small few that refuse to cooperate or continue to go out and deceive consumers and take their money.
And unfortunately, I guess we were talking before the show started, that small few really does affect quite a few people in Idaho, doesn't it? Could you give us an idea of how common consumer fraud is in this state?
We receive about 200 written consumer complaints a week. That's complaints against businesses. That doesn't include telephone calls or inquiries. We do have consumers calling us on a regular basis, and we encourage them to call and inquire about a business if they're going to make a major purchase or if they're interested in doing business with them. We can tell those consumers, yes, we have complaints, or no, we don't have complaints. If we've had complaints, or those complaints resolved in a satisfactory manner. And if there's ever been legal action taken against that company, you will be notified of that also. And we strongly encourage consumers to do that before, if they have any questions or if there's any red flags, before they do business, especially out of state, to contact our office first.
Now that sounds like a Better Business Bureau function. Do we have Better Business Bureaus in Idaho, and if so, do you work with them?
We work closely with the Better Business Bureaus. The Better Business Bureaus, however, work in regions. There are 2 Better Business Bureaus that are located in Idaho. One's in Idaho Falls and services eastern Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And then there's a Better Business Bureau in Boise that services the Treasure Valley. The Better Business Bureau that services North Idaho is located in Spokane.
In relation to that, it's often true in government, all issues will not come under one department of government or office. Would you clarify for the viewers within the state of Idaho, if they have a complaint, the types that they are, and as we've indicated, many of those come to the Attorney General's office, but some go to other entities of within state government.
Right. People who have complaints regarding insurance companies or insurance agents need to contact the State Department of Insurance. Our statute strictly prohibits us from becoming involved in insurance-related issues. Questions regarding banks and lending institutions and fair debt collection goes to the State Department of Finance. If you have a problem with an odometer rollback, you feel your odometer's been rolled back on your vehicle, you need to contact the State Department of Transportation because they investigate those types of problems.
You've indicated that you're very open to telephone calls or letters, but is there any kind of concern that a consumer would have that would not be really one that any state agency would cover, and that therefore that would be done locally, or there is just no avenue for that particular complaint?
Well, one of the complaints that we do have a lot of questions on is on landlord-tenant issues. There is not a state agency that mediates landlord-tenant disputes. There just isn't funding to do that. However, we do print a pamphlet that we mail to consumers free of charge that gives them their rights as tenants and gives them the rights of the landlord. However, then we have to turn them over to either small claims court or a private attorney, and in some cases Idaho Legal Aid is able to assist.
We're speaking of Idaho, of course, but there would be in some of the other states where that would be different and the law would be different or the funding would be different.
Right, and in other states there might be funding for landlord-tenant related disputes.
I would like to get into another area, and that has to do with trying to prevent this from happening in the first place. There's some obviously educational tools that are very helpful so that an individual might not find themselves ripped off and would not need to call the particular consumer division, in this case of the Attorney General's office. Among the things that you gave me is some of the educational materials that you have is, I think, a list of about 10 points of things that people should be aware of. And if Steve will bear with me, I think this would be a good time for us to inform viewers what they should be looking out for and what they should not be subject to replying to by those who have not got good intentions in mind in selling products.
The 10 tips for consumer survival are: if it seems too good to be true, it is. Read, ask questions, comparison shop, and know the market. Insist that all claims, promises, and warranties be in writing. Never sign anything that you haven't read or you don't understand. Because you don't have the right to change your mind after you make a major purchase, cool off for 24 hours before you buy. Never give your credit card number or your banking account number to a telephone or mail solicitor if you don't know the company. Get written estimates before any repairs are made. Know where to get help. Check with your local Better Business Bureau or the Attorney General's office. Keep receipts, sales slips, and warranties for as long as you own the product. And most importantly, it's your money. Don't let yourself be intimidated, because you can always go someplace else.
And if all of those were followed, it would be very difficult for some of the companies that have done the things they have to be able to even carry on business. I would suspect that if all of those guidelines were followed and you got everything in writing and so forth, that some companies would not pursue you any further through telemarketing or telephone solicitations, what I'm trying to say.
Telemarketing is very big business. We see that it's the largest area of complaints in our office. Telemarketers focus a lot of times on senior citizens because they oftentimes are home alone, they're lonely, and that's the only outside contact that they get, and they prey on those people and they continue to call them, and they either portray themselves as friends, and if that tactic doesn't work, then they resort to threatening tactics, and they scare these older people into believing that they have to buy these products, that they have to give them money. This is simply not true. They need to hang up the phone, and if they don't feel compelled to hang up the phone, we suggest that you just set the phone down, walk away, take a walk, make yourself a cup of tea, because it costs these telemarketers to contact you, and if you don't respond to them, they aren't making any money and they'll quit calling you.
Steve Sheen.
Chris, you mentioned something in those 10 points that surprised me just a little bit. I think you said that because you don't have the right to change your mind on a major purchase, is that one of those tips?
Yes.
And that caught me by a little surprise. I make a major purchase. There isn't a cooling off period in Idaho. I think some states, maybe it's specifically dealing with automobiles, provide a 3-day period, I think,
Okay.
During which time you can return that purchase and just say, I changed my mind, I don't want the car.
That is a common misconception. In Idaho, the only time you have a 72-hour cooling off period is on door-to-door sales of household good purchases of $25 or more. And the only other time that 3-day cooling off period applies is on some telemarketing sales when the telemarketer is registered to telemarket with our office. But with major purchases such as automobiles, when you sign that contract, you're legally bound to it. So that's why we try to warn people to take your time. Do not be pressured into signing something that you haven't read or you don't understand. Check out the market. Make sure you can afford those car payments. Check with your insurance company before you sign the contract. We do get complaints from consumers that after they've bought a car, they've discovered that they can't afford the insurance on this new vehicle. And that is not the dealer's responsibility. That's the consumer's responsibility.
That's a good point. And also, I'm sure everything you said doesn't discount the fact that many reputable merchants, and as we said, most are, have their own return policies.
Right.
Some items, electrical equipment, for instance, once it's been installed, and other things like that, it just isn't appropriate to return them. But that doesn't invalidate the return policies of many major marketers.
Right, and the return policy is strictly up to the business, whether or not they give you a cash refund or if they give you an in-store credit. That is up to the business. There's no state law that speaks specifically to store returns.
Chris, do you have some examples of some of the more common kinds of scams that people in this area should watch out for?
Telemarketing is number one. You get a telephone call late in the evening guaranteeing that you have been specially selected to win one of the 4 following grand prizes. They tell you that the reason you've been selected is because you are a major credit card holder in good standing. They want to know if you're a MasterCard or a Visa card holder, and then they want you to participate in their promotion. Some of the items that we see people receiving for their money are diamond sapphire tennis bracelets, and their estimated value is less than $75. Vitamins, a lifetime supply of vitamins. Oftentimes these vitamins are not even FDA approved skincare products, and in no way should anyone believe that these are a lifetime supply, because they simply are not. The consumer then gives their credit card number out, or the latest is to send a check via a common carrier, and they don't get the grand prize that they were promised. They don't get their money back. So we would warn consumers, just simply hang up the phone. If you're not interested, don't stay on the line. And with sweepstakes, the same thing. You get those cards in the mail, throw them away, because if it sounds too good to be true, it is.
Do you have other examples? I recall reading not too long ago, I think, I believe it was someone locally, certainly it was someone in Idaho, who was victimized by someone who said, well, we have a delivery of medical supplies that we need to ship to you. You're the I think it was a merchant. You're the most convenient place to drop this off. Dr. So-and-so will be by to pick them up. Will you pay the COD for him until he can get there? It's an emergency situation. They try to do a good deed for someone, pay $65 or $85 or more in COD charges, and of course there's nothing in the box, and there's no Dr. So-and-so who's going to pick it up. Do you have other examples of fraud, scam cases like that?
Well, and that's an interesting one, because there was a scam that was going on. People were getting contacted, told that they had won a car, and all they had to do was pay their taxes, and they needed to send it to an accountant in Nampa, Idaho. They gave a Nampa address that didn't exist, and they gave a local telephone number. We contacted that telephone number. It was an answering service, and what they wanted the consumer to do was, via Western Union, send them $800. Now, what's interesting about Western Union is when they give you a code word, and as long as that person on the other end, they can pick up that Western Union anywhere in the United States, and it's very difficult to track. As long as they have the code word, they can pick up your $800, and it's very difficult to locate these people. So, and you pay your taxes to the State Tax Commission. You don't pay them via Western Union to a telemarketer.
I want to add that when we talk about this one area, telemarketing, that is such a difficult thing, we've not identified any company. That was the purpose of the program. But I do assume that in that field, as others, that there are some individuals that are in organizations that are very legitimate, and others that aren't. And so we've not identified any company. But following the points that you've indicated, those companies that are legitimate and are trying to serve the public, I would assume would have a policy where they would want you to follow those kind of points.
Right, and we do have a telemarketing registration law in Idaho, and the people who are legitimate and that are doing business, they most generally are registered. They're willing to give you that information. They have to, by law, give you that information, tell you whether or not they're registered and what their telemarketing registration number is. And it's unfortunate that several rotten apples have spoiled the whole bin, and it's a very difficult industry now because of these problematic telemarketers. But we see it as a very, very big industry, and they target senior citizens, and that's not good.
You've brought with you some materials, and I'm holding up here. It's very quiet, so it'll be hard to be seen, but holding up one of your packets. You have packets like this on different subjects. I know this is one for senior citizens. And you've also brought with you and given me some little stickers that you can put on places like, I believe, your refrigerator and all. And what are the purpose for these? Is that a reminder of what can happen to you?
Yes, we want people to simply hang up on phony telephone offers and throw these sweepstakes away. The really great thing about all of these educational materials is when we sue a company and a judge imposes fines and penalties, it goes into the Consumer Education Fund. It pays for all of our educational materials, and it pays for me to be here today. So it doesn't cost the taxpayers of Idaho anything for the consumer education efforts here.
Well, another question I have before going back to Steve, and that is, we've talked about the use of the telephone and so forth. A lot of activity also is door-to-door, physically appearing on the premises. What are some of the problems that you see there? Steve has alluded to some of that earlier, but is there any particular...
Driveway paving scams is a big one. They target senior citizens again. Oftentimes they come in, they have an out-of-state license plate, and they say, I have an extra load of seal coat on, and I can make you a great deal on a paving your driveway. They'll quote a price, it's very low, and then when they get done, they'll say, oh, well, it costs considerably more. They'll demand a check, and they don't give you that 3-day right of rescission on their contracts most generally. What they do is they immediately go down to your bank and cash your check and move on to another state. They're very transient. It's very difficult to catch up with them. So if you weren't in the market for a new driveway paving job, don't fall for this scam.
You said something really interesting. If someone came to your door and said, you know, the truck is out there and we have this extra asphalt, we can do it for $200. If you say yes and they pour it, legally, could you say to them after they pour it, that's what you quoted and that's all I have to pay?
Well, that's what you should tell them. However, a lot of times, like I said, they go to seniors' houses. There's usually 1 or 2 of them, and they get very brazen with the older people. They frighten older people.
But if you actually wrote a check for $200, legally they could not require more later because I quoted that price. Would that be true?
Well, you know, if they quoted a price, they could say that it took more than their original quote.
But then another problem is it's a verbal thing, and how do you prove?
Right.
So again, we're back to, if it appears to be too good, then it is.
Then it is, yes.
Okay. Steve Sheen.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. Earlier, Chris, you said that some of the telemarketers, the fraudulent telemarketers who target elderly people, it isn't always just a scam. Or if the efforts to win their friendship don't work, they'll start intimidating or trying to intimidate the older people. How do they do that?
Well, a lot of times what they'll do is if the consumer decides that they can't afford this anymore, they'll try to exercise their abilities to get the telemarketer to stop contacting them. Sometimes we've had all kinds of threats. One elderly lady in Boise was told she was going to win $25,000. She said, no, I will not give you my credit card number. They had talked to her before. They knew that she had a little dog. They told her that if she didn't give them her credit card number, she wouldn't win the $25,000. Therefore, she'd have to barbecue her little dog to eat that winter.
Terrible.
And that made her mad. And that was the only reason she didn't give her credit card number out. But there have been all kinds of interesting threats. And, you know, a lot of times senior citizens, they're alone, and they believe those threats. They believe that someone will come to their house, or that they will contact their family members and tell them that they've become involved in these sweepstakes scams.
Chris, in those cases where you've identified a real fraud having taken place, how successful has your office been in first prosecuting the perpetrators, and second, making sure that they don't spring back up in business again somewhere else with a new business name and a new scam to try to run?
We have very vigorously taken after telemarketers who have been ripping off Idahoans, and several of them we've gotten permanent injunctions against. They can no longer contact Idahoans, and we have been pretty successful in getting consumers' money back. However, part of the education program is it's very difficult to get your money back, and oftentimes we won't be able to get all of your money back, so simply don't give them your credit card number or send them money in the first place.
I guess one of the keys to helping your office do its job better, though, is to report as quickly as possible to you any suspected cases of fraud or other kinds of marketing abuse.
Right. Contact our office, give us the information. We follow up on all of our consumer complaints that we receive. They're a permanent part of our record so that we can, closely monitor patterns of practice of unfair, deceptive business acts or practices.
Steve, this is a very appropriate time to give the telephone number for those people in the state of Idaho, and in other states they should contact the Attorney General of their state, or in Canada they would have offices in the province that they could we put on the screen the Attorney General Consumer Division, State of Idaho, and within state this is a toll-free number, 1-800-432-3545, and then your office can respond to that. And it's very nice to have a toll-free number, because many people who are ripped off oftentimes are in trouble financially because of what they already lost or just the income in general. So it's very important to know they're not paying for that telephone call when they're explaining the problem.
Right.
We have very little time left, but I was thinking as you were talking about if someone was pressuring you either at your door or on the telephone, how would you react to this as advice? Not being an expert, I'm just responding to some thoughts that I had. And one of them is that if someone was to get aggressive with you on the phone, would it not be effective to get rid of them by saying, as soon as this call ends, I'm calling the Attorney General's office?
That would probably be a very effective way of handling it. A lot of times telemarketers will contact me at home, and I will ask them information such as their business name, their mailing address, whether or not they're registered to telemarket in the state. And but simply, if you're not interested, the best defense is to hang up.
Oh, immediately when they start the
Yes.
process. I have one friend that I have talked to, and he says that because of that some organizations have done this, and like we said, a lot of them don't. Of course, a lot of them are very well-meaning. But he decided the best policy for himself was he just would not make agreements over the telephone. So that's another potential way of dealing with it.
Right.
Anyone that calls him that he doesn't know anything about the organization, he says, I'm sorry, I don't do business by phone. You'll have to come and see me. But again, there are different ways and options that people go about
Right,
that.
and it's unfortunate that people have had to resort to refusing to do business over the telephone, because there are legitimate organizations out there that have to rely on telemarketing to receive their funds. But boy, it's been really big business for the scam artists.
And for those who are honest, they are providing a service for people, for example, who have disabilities and can't get out and so forth. So it's a real challenge, but the prosecutions helps to clean up the process too.
Right.
I just got a signal that we're out of time, and on behalf of Steve Shink and our staff, thank you on your busy trip to North Idaho to come by and provide this public service to our viewers.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking about consumer rights and some advice on how to deal with possible rip-offs, and we know that it has been informative and we hope helpful to you. We invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we will discuss yet another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.